Let's talk about Still Wakes the Deep, the new horror title from developer The Chinese Room. And usually in these instances, after I complete a game, I'd do a review, but I want to do something fun and discuss whether or not anyone would survive this scenario. To do so, this video is going to contain spoilers, so there's your warning. With that being said, let's dive right in. Still Wakes the Deep takes place on an oil rig known as the Bear D in the North Sea, which lies between Britain, Denmark, and several other countries near the European continental shelf. This is probably the worst place you want to be in a horror scenario, and is honestly refreshing because I don't think there are many horror titles set at sea, and probably for good reason. The likelihood for survival is very low, and when you're up against a cosmic or mysterious entity, it's practically zero. In the horror genre, it's usually not the protagonist that makes bad choices. Your character is more than likely the one telling everyone that we should leave as soon as possible. It's essentially everyone else around them that's at fault, and that's kind of the case here. The individual in charge of the Bear D is Rennick, and he, for all intents and purposes, is a piece of shit. He is a company man through and through and treats everyone on the rig, including the protagonist Kaz, like crap. I don't think there's a single redeeming quality about this man, and he ultimately ends up dooming everyone when he fails to escape on the helicopter. I assume that the individual that was trying to pilot became infected by the cosmic entity, and then it ended up crashing once they lost control of themselves. Once the helicopter is gone, I think we'd probably all be standing around saying to ourselves that we're screwed as our chances of survival have practically plummeted. You're also probably telling yourself that, look, we do have lifeboats that we can get to. But at this time, you'll notice that the entity is extending its tendrils out of the ocean and is mutating everything it touches. The moment it grabs a crew member, it warps their body and mind, and they become nearly unstoppable killing machines. They're hyper aware, and they more than likely know where the lifeboats are, so that's probably something they would destroy. But if you were to get lucky, and unlike Kaz, who had to find out pretty quickly that the Barra-D crew did not maintain the lifeboats properly, because the moment he tries to activate the winch, it just falls into the ocean. If you happen to get into the lifeboat, where are you dropping it? It's dropping it right on top of the creature. It's going to be aware of this, it's going to grab you, and it's going to get a free meal. And if there's multiple people in the lifeboat, it's going to get a multi-kill. So you've just helped them essentially get that kill streak. Those two scenarios pretty much screw you almost immediately. No helo, no lifeboats. So what happens next? If you happen to say to yourself you're going to fight back, what are you fighting back with? Flares? You're on an oil platform. You're going to blow yourself up. Are you going to wait for help? It might take a few hours, but the entity takes over the rig in a very short period of time, so you're dead there too. So let me know in the comments what you would do in that situation. No helo, no lifeboats. In my opinion, I guess I just die. As you're playing the game, you're more than likely noticing that the cards were stacked against the crew of the Barra-D from the start. You're isolated at sea, and as Kaz found out through early parts of this game, you're practically going to be forced into unwinnable situations. And Kaz cannot defend himself, and let me explain why. Because unlike titles like Outcast, which you're considered a non-combatant, so for whatever reason you can't just defend yourself, and Still Wakes the Deep, you can't survive these fights with these monsters. There's just no way. Now, there's going to be some of you out there who's telling yourself that you're built different and that you would win, and to that I applaud you, but more than likely, you're going to end up as some grotesque meat fusion screaming random things that only make sense to your broken mind. If you're lucky, you'll end up like Rennick or Adair, who became a self-aware monster. But with a Rennick, he's just a bigger asshole in his mutated monstrous form than he was in life. If you're unlucky, you'll be a monster that barely has any self-control. You'll be in laundry, staring at the washer, wondering when the light is eventually going to turn off. Either way, you are screwed. Still Wakes the Deep plays out like a horror movie. It has a number of cinematic moments in which Kaz narrowly escapes death, but the moment when things go awry on the Barra-D, it practically spells doom for everyone working on the rig. And let's say for a second, we pivot and we try to apply movie or video game logic. How long do you think you would survive? Let's kind of talk about that for a little bit. There's a handful of moments where Kaz is thrust into sure death situations. Notice I didn't say near death. We're talking sure death here. He falls off the helipad into the ocean, and this is a steep drop, and we're talking hundreds of feet here. When you hit the water at that height and that speed, it's not a soft impact. You've practically broken every bone in your body and more than likely died on impact. And if you didn't die on impact, you're drowning. By the grace of video game magic, Kaz survives unscathed and practically becomes Superman during the course of this game. He is described as unathletic. This can be seen in his running animation, which is comically slow, by the way, and he flails his arms as if he has no idea how to run. But even as hard as he flails his arms, he's still moving really slow. Yet, with that being said, he is making death defying jumps constantly, including one that finds him leaping onto the remains of the downed helicopter. In the same sequence, he escapes death again by leaping onto the platform below, and once again, proving Kaz's survival is more than likely by sheer plot armor. Does it make for a thrilling experience? Hell yeah, it does. You are 100% rooting for this man's survival, but it becomes kind of funny because he goes from your everyday electrician to an action hero. I'm not saying Chris Pratt should play Kaz if this somehow gets a film adaptation, but let him work with a dialect coach on a Scottish accent, and we may have something here. The thing is, these short death situations are seen constantly throughout the game. There's even moments where the infected can hit Kaz with their tendrils and you're forced to escape. My assumption is that these tendrils aren't just slashing out, they are impaling you because the tendrils straighten out when they hit you. If that's the case, this makes Kaz's survival even the more questionable, but let's, for the sake of argument, say that they aren't stabbing you. They're just grabbing you. You're told at the beginning you should not come in contact with the entity because if you do so, there's a high likelihood you can become infected. As you play, it becomes clear that the entity is greatly affecting Kaz, so regardless, he's pretty much a goner. It doesn't matter if we apply video game logic here. Horror games generally force you to suspend disbelief because otherwise, most of them would be over in a matter of moments. And I really like this game, but the fact that there are so many short death situations was a bit over the top. When you first boot up Still Wakes the Deep, it comes off as a grounded horror title with an isolated setting. It appears you're going to be a normal person fighting for survival. In my opinion, Kaz is a believable character. In fact, I think almost everyone is well written and believable. It just becomes harder to suspend my disbelief the more dire the situation becomes. You'll notice that the entity's influence is everywhere. It's in the walls, it's in the water, it's in the oil. There's just no way that anyone could possibly escape this, and somehow Kaz makes it to the end. He's supposed to represent the average person, but by the time you reach the end, the feats are far too fantastic, and I think that at one point, I honestly believe that he had a shot to make it out, but I don't know where he would go. Oil rigs are normally found a few miles offshore, and with communication down, the company that the Bear D belongs to is probably going to send out a team to discover what went wrong. In a normal horror setting, like a slasher or something slightly supernatural like a vampire or a werewolf attack or something, sure, he could survive. He'd be at the top of the helipad with a flare or something like that. We'd be looking over his shoulder, and then we see that dramatic look off in the distance. But in the case of having a cosmic or supernatural entity in your way, it's another thing entirely. The likelihood of getting to where you get to in this game is nothing short of miraculous. And by that, I mean just being able to traverse this rig and survive the things that Kaz does, to me, is insane. Because this is supposed to come off as a grounded horror game, and the game itself is anything but that. Now, that doesn't take away from the entertainment value of Still Wakes the Deep. This game was fun to play, but I don't think you should be able to survive everything with dumb luck. When you're telling me that I can't fight back, my understanding as the player is that realistically, I do not stand a chance of what's waiting for me in the dark. But when I can make these leaps across certain platforms and swim for long distances in thick engineering coveralls, then why can't I roll the dice and swing on these infected? Something's got to give there. Something you got to make sense of that. I think that the intent of this game was to take a normal character and thrust them into a harrowing situation. But the more you play, I think the more you feel and believe that Kaz could make it out. And why not? He survived falling off an oil rig platform, crashing into a shipping container at high speeds, and being submerged underwater in oil for lengthy periods. He was also attacked by a number of different infected crew members and survived that. So it feels like what he's experiencing is this nightmare. And at some points, I really felt like he was just hallucinating everything, but I don't believe so because the ending feels like he had to do what was necessary to make the sacrifice I think that we as players was expecting someone to make given the circumstances of the situations that you find yourself in. Now, apart from Kaz, there's probably only two characters that really understood what needed to be done to ensure that this entity didn't reach shore. I'm thinking Finley and maybe Brody. It may have taken them to see that almost all the options to help survive were exhausted, but I think for Finley, it's the type of character that I really appreciate in the horror genre. I just surprised that around midpoint of the game, when the entity was clearly taking over the rig and there was no end in sight, that no one stopped and said, we need to pull out all the stops to ensure it doesn't reach the shore. We need to prevent anyone from getting here to stop the infection from spreading. I understand self-preservation, but at that point, you're essentially going against the force of nature, and it was always going to end in the sacrifice play. That's just how the game pushed itself along. I'm glad that Kaz wanted to remain hopeful. I'm glad that's in his character. But I think that after everything he had to go through in engineering and administration and all the other areas, that the moment that Finley suggests blowing up and killing the entity, that he would have immediately been on their side. It was kind of weird that he was against it at first, because the game really tries to push the reluctant hero trope with him. But in this type of horror setting, especially when you've seen and experienced what Kaz has, you would expect the player to understand what needs to be done, come to grips with it, because escape would only buy you and your loved ones a short period of grace. Overall, I really enjoyed playing Still Wake the Deep. I do think it has its issues, but it never outstays its welcome. And I do think that for a game that wanted you to experience a different type of horror in a unique setting, that I'm hoping more games explore, by the way, going about it in a cinematic way just didn't make sense considering how grounded you wanted it to be, and it really makes it difficult to suspend your disbelief the more times you're in these really improbable scenarios. Let's be honest with ourselves. The average person, like they're trying to make you believe Kaz is, does not survive any of the scenarios in this game. Most of the characters on the rig are probably dead at the beginning because Rennick effectively dooms everybody. And plus, the infected are just terrifying. They're so fast and they're very quick to spot you and they just rip people to shreds. I just don't see it. You know, the only person who maybe might make it far is Brody. His experience really shows during your interactions with him in the game, and he might be the one character that might make it 2/3 of the way through before he finds himself face to face with Rennick, because eventually the entity is going to find you. Kaz is probably dead once he falls off the rig or anytime he is met with a sure death situation. I really did laugh when he hit a shipping container at high speed and just walked it off. He had a limp for a little bit and just said, screw it, we're just going to do it live. And just kept running through. I was just shocked. I was like, what is happening here? That part of that was just really, really funny. And I think it was unintentional, but you just can't keep having these types of scenarios and expecting for the player to just be like, yeah, it's totally realistic. We totally survived that. Finley might survive for a short period of time due to her understanding of the rig's layout, but I think at some point she just gets caught by one of the infected engineering because they are so fast and strong, and I can't see her outrunning any of these enemies, especially Trots. That dude is absolutely terrifying. But let me know in the comments if you believe you would survive the mysterious entity that attacks the Barra D and how you would do it, because that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. Still Wakes the Deep is out on Game Pass. I recommend you give it a try. You probably should have done that before you watched the video, but whatever. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.